covering the islands of the Bahamas. ZNS Network presents The Bahamas Tonight.
This portion of the news is brought to you by McDonald's. McDonald's, I'm loving it.
An elder statesman bows out of frontline politics. Good evening, I'm Opal Rhodes, sitting in for Keishla Adderley, and this is The Bahamas Tonight. Topping the news, former Prime Minister Hubert Ingram has tendered his resignation, ending 35 years of service in public life. Now, this step paves the way for a by-election in North Abaco, which Mr. Ingram represented in the House of Assembly throughout his political career. Tonight, we have team coverage, beginning with our Shanique Miller.
F&M supporters and parliamentarians applauded the man who led their organization for the past 19 years, 15 of those as Prime Minister. Hubert Ingram's place in the F&M is undeniable. His work in the country as nation's chief puts him in a category as one of the nation's proudest sons. As he made his way to the House of Assembly, where he served for the past 35 years, supporters pressed through the crowd to shake hands. Others greeted him. Once inside Parliament, House Speaker Dr. Kendall Major accepted Mr. Ingram's resignation, making his exit from public life official. Although submitted today, the resignation comes into effect 6 weeks from now. He explained the delay.
The leader of the party asked me to consider not resigning forthwith, and I gave the matter my most mature consideration. Secondly, I think the Bahamian people ought to have an opportunity to reflect upon the proposed referendum and to be educated and informed about it. And I want to make sure it's not rushed by the government. And it's been said that I have some part to play in when it's going to come. Thirdly, and this is probably the most important one, Greg Gomez, who was one of the 4 persons who applied to the party for a nomination, has spent some time in the United States of America. And he hasn't been back home quite a year yet. He has applied. I want him to be considered like the other 4 as a candidate, and my postponement will facilitate that.
60 days from August 31st takes us to the end of October, the window by law for the by-election to be held. Free National Movement officials say they plan to retain the North Abaco seat. Now, reports have surfaced in the media suggesting the F&M has become a splintered group. Some even lay the blame at Mr. Ingram's feet, accusing him of deserting the party. But the former leader says once a leader suffers defeat, he should do the honorable thing.
There was no circumstance under which a leader, such as myself, who's been leader of a party for 19 years, can take a party into election, lose the election, and who wants to stay on. If you were a young person, one first shot, take Menace for instance, as a new leader of the party, if he takes the party into the election and the party loses, he ought to offer his resignation, but the party might well say to him, fine, we think you ought to stay because, we think you have opportunities for the future. Someone like me who served for 3 terms, it's unthinkable at age 64, 65 in a couple of weeks' time that I would stay on. That's unthinkable.
But how sure is the F&M that it can be the people's choice once again, considering that Hubert Ingram is no longer at the helm? More importantly, is the party in a position to be a real factor in 2017?
The F&M is a strong, vibrant organization. It has many, many people and supporters. It got 65,000 votes in the last election. It went in the election with a bad economy, a terrible economy, and it did very well under those circumstances. And so, no, I have no concern or fear about that. The F&M will bounce back.
The former Prime Minister returns to the House of Assembly next Wednesday to make his farewell speech. Now, during his political career, public opinion has painted Ingram as a one-man show, usurping his cabinet ministers. Asked his thoughts on the harsh branding of being a dictator, the 8-time elected MP said the Bahamian people know his style leaned toward being accountable.
What they could say about me was that I ran a disciplined ship, that every Tom, Dick and Harry didn't have his own policy.
While he is leaving frontline politics at the end of August, Ingram says he will not forsake his party. The former Prime Minister plans to act in whatever capacity the party needs him to. Shanique Miller, ZNS News.
Well, members of the press also asked Mr. Ingram for his opinion on the apparent increase in police detail for cabinet ministers.
We have a high crime problem in the society. But what you cannot do is permit policemen to act outside the law. That it cannot be that you shoot 2 armed robbers or crooks one night and you tell me nothing about it. I just shot them, they're dead. You must explain to me. I'm a public. You have a right to shoot when you are threatened. The police are supposed to facilitate and accommodate people against whom there's a threat. If you are a high-risk person, then the police ought to be able to give you additional protection and or in some cases permit you to carry an arm. I never had to carry any arms. No minister of mine ever had to carry any arms. And so the police have made their decision. I mean, normally what happens is the commissioner will speak to the Prime Minister about whether or not a gun should be issued to Jack or to Harry, and clearly if it is deemed that such a person is a high-risk person, then they would arm them.
The former Prime Minister also weighing in on the gambling issue and the proposed referendum. Altavi's Munnings has that angle of the story.
Prime Minister and North Abaco Member of Parliament, the Right Honourable Hubert Ingram, describes the government's proposed referendum on gaming. Mr. Ingram believes Bahamians should vote on a referendum to decide whether or not they can gamble in casinos.
We are singular in our decision in the Bahamas that excludes its citizens from being able to gamble in a casino. Nobody else in the world does that. That's because of our own peculiar history. In 1965, when the decision was made, it was also determined that Bahamians could not be croupiers in the casino. That you had to be from the Western Europe. You had to be Italian or one of them to be a casino croupier in the Bahamas. No Bahamian was a croupier in the Bahamas. In fact, at the time of independence in 1973, the then Prime Minister said at a press conference that as long as he was Prime Minister, there would never be a Bahamian croupier in the casinos in the Bahamas, because that was the established policy. They changed their mind over time.
Mr. Ingram reflected on his former government's intention to hold a referendum back in 2010, but he verified at his press conference Wednesday that a subject was not yet determined then. The former Prime Minister maintains, though, if his government had the chance to hold a referendum, casino gambling would be included.
I don't know why it should be assumed that we should spend all this money on a referendum to deal with the question of gambling when there are some issues. Like, for instance, I want you, as a female in this country, to have the same rights I have under the Constitution.
The Free National Movement's 2002 referendum fielded 5 questions on gender discrimination, a national commission for teachers, and appointing an independent parliamentary commissioner and boundaries commission. All 5 questions were rejected by voters, with between 62.8% and 70.9% voting against it. But Mr. Ingram remembered that back then, residents argued that Bahamians were reportedly not educated enough to vote effectively on those issues.
So you can't make a deal with a number of fellas before the election, get their money, and then call upon me to support you or to vote for it. So you ask me the question whether I'm going to vote or not, I wouldn't waste my time on such a referendum.
Altavi's Munnings, ZNS News.
Well, Prime Minister Perry Christie has held talks with cable and wireless officials to discuss its majority stake in the Bahamas Telecommunications Company. Mr. Christie has requested a report detailing what took place during the sale. Now, Mr. Ingram also talked about the BTC issue during his press conference today.
It would be wonderful if the government would proceed with the plans left in place by the F&M to sell 9% of the shares in BTC to the public of the Bahamas at the same price we sold to cable and wireless. That would produce some revenue for them and also broaden the ownership base of the company in the hands of ordinary Bahamians.
Well, late this afternoon, the Progressive Liberal Party issued a statement responding to comments by the former Prime Minister today. It says government is firmly committed to and will regain the majority shares and controlling interest of the phone company, contrary to what Mr. Ingram has said. The statement says government has met with relevant authorities at BTC and the process is fully underway. It says the opposition and Mr. Ingram have no responsibility for governance, but rather the government has to be accountable to the Bahamian people. The church and state partnering in the war on crime as they work to create safer communities. The latest team effort took place in an inner city area which has its share of crime. Furin Kiri has that story.
The The Village Keepers Initiative is a partnership between religious leaders, the police and residents in the Bain and Grantstown community. It's not new, but National Security Minister Dr. Bernard Nottage, who grew up in Bain and Grantstown, believes the concept will play an important role in reducing the level of violent crimes, especially among young people, while addressing other social ills in the inner city community.
If I leave this area worse than it was when I was a boy, shame on me. And so, for me, this is personal. This is very personal, that we have to improve these communities, one by one, person by person, and create opportunities. Could you imagine? I was born on East Street. I got the opportunity to go to university, to become a physician, to serve the country as a politician, and I can't create that same platform for other young people?
The idea for Village Keepers was born back in 2010 when Dr. Nottage, the MP for Bain and Grantstown, says he became so frustrated by the level of violent crime in that area that he reached out to every religious leader in the community for help. As a result, church leaders threw their support behind the initiative. Meantime, Bahamas Christian Council President Reverend Ranford Patterson believes the initiative can work in communities throughout the country.
We need this kind of collaboration. We need this kind of interaction and working together throughout the length and breadth of our country. Because there are many communities that perhaps are not a part of the inner city who need the same level of involvement by the police, by the church, and by the family. And so, Dr. Nottage and to all of you who are responsible for this program, we ask you to please consider going not just on this side of town, but in the Michael area, as well as other areas that we believe that this program can make a difference.
Assistant Commissioner of Police Leon Bethel agrees.
This is a refined approach to community policing. The police did not drop out of the sky. I need you to know that. Many moons ago, there was a community, no police. The leaders of the community decide that we have some rules and regulations that we want to enforce.
Farron Carey, ZNS News.
And still to come, a shot in the arm for religious tourism. We'll explain in a moment.